Yo, what's checking, everybody? Welcome to another edition of OB at Night. Although this is kind of mostly OB in the late afternoon, depending on when you're watching this. OB happy hour. I'm not exactly sure. It's OB at Night tonight. I'm Jeff Ketchum, your host. This is the Orange Bloods Texas Football Channel. Give us a like, subscribe to the channel, click the bell, ring the bell, get notifications. I always want to pretend to be that guy ringing the bell in that old Texas Tech game, but I'm a little wary of hand movements up and down, signaturing, ringing the bell. Just get notifications and we won't have to worry about it. Ladies, gentlemen, everything in between, watching the show today, tonight, for the rest of the week here on the Orange Bloods Texas Football Channel. It's Texas-Alabama week. I am so fascinated by the concept of what happens this week, which players step up this week, what do the storylines from next week look like, all things that we'll be talking about throughout the show today. My dogs will be chiming in. It's going to be a fantastic show. I think my family, true story, before we get too deep into Texas, Alabama, tonight is the last night for Luby's. In this area, the Luby's is shutting down. And my wife is such a Luby's connoisseur that she literally took the kids to Luby's. One last Luann before it goes out of business, presumably. I don't know that they're throwing those things up anywhere new. But if you hear the dogs barking, it's because the family's home from their final trip to Luby's before it closes down. I might have to call PETA to save a few of these dogs before it's all said and done. So, look, we are talking Texas, Alabama. We are talking about the elements of this game that I think will decide things. And let's just start in kind of a peculiar position. It's easy to talk about the quarterbacks on both sides of the ball. And Anwar and I did a video here literally today talking about the quarterback matchup. You can go to the Orange Bloods video page and you will see that there. Ben asks, does this show normally start at 6 o'clock? The answer to that is no, but I have a fantasy football draft at 7:30. So we were either going to do the show a little bit earlier or we were going to have to wait until my fantasy draft is over, and that could be 10 o'clock. And I don't know that I wanted to wait until 10 o'clock to do the show. So, yes, a little bit early today. Full confessional, myself, Alex Dunlap, Anwar Richardson, all of us have a fantasy draft starting at 7:30. Nothing I can do about that. Technically, the damn thing was supposed to start at 7 o'clock, but Yahoo wouldn't let me sign up for that. So it kind of is what it is. Thanks for the question, Ben. You are on top of it, and I might as well go ahead and get that out of the way. Eric says, now we have a damn ban problem. Luby's is greatness, all closed in DFW. So that's what I think I'm worried about. My mom went to Luby's. We're a big Luby's family. My mom went to Luby's last week, found out that they were closing up shop at that particular location. She indicated that there was going to be another location that was going to be open. I'm sure I'll find out all about it when the show is over. But yeah, the fried fish, the macaroni and cheese with the mashed potatoes, all of that is going the way of the dodo bird. Luby's dropping like flies. I saw one in Austin dropping as well. Shout out to Eric, though, in the super chat. And yes, there is a ban problem, although where opposing teams' fans get seated is one of the stories of any story that could take place in really sports that I care about the least. If the opposing team gets 5,000 tickets, I don't think it's the hosting team's I don't think it's their obligation to put them necessarily on the first level, or if you have a 2-level stadium, put them up in the second level. Like, that's kind of how it goes. Just because they buy a seat to get into the game doesn't mean that they get priority over season ticket holders. And I would be perfectly fine if you just stash the opposing team and their fans as far away as possible and emphasize getting your fans the best seats possible. And if that means that when you go to visit their stadium, the away seats are in a crappy place in the stadium, it's kind of the way it should go. Like, you should be, in my mind, the home team should have the biggest home field advantage and take care of its fans first and foremost above anybody else, outside of like safety and things like that, so that Alabama's fans aren't happy about where they're being placed. I mean, I don't care. Alabama fans are probably going to have a good time on Saturday, at least at certain points during the day. They can get over themselves in the fan thing and where they're sitting. Welcome to the SEC. No, you welcome to DKR. We're going to put your ass in the back, and you're either going to like it or you can sell your tickets to somebody else if you don't like to sit in the nosebleeds. Comes with the territory. So like I said, one of the conversations I wanted to start today's show off on isn't so much the quarterbacks. We did that today. I kind of want to focus on one of the areas where I think Alabama's probably concerned about Texas. And it's an area where I think that Texas can potentially change the game a little bit. If we're talking about what's the recipe for an upset, ironically, one of the places where Texas might be able to do some damage is its defensive line against the Alabama offensive line. And if you go look, I talked about in the Monday Overreaction show yesterday, that one of my big matchups to keep an eye on is going to be Texas defensive end Barron Sorrell against J.C. Latham, the young offensive tackle for Alabama, who just, I guess a year ago, right, class of 2021, was the number 3 overall prospect in the Rivals 100 as a 5-star. He made his first career start on Saturday against Utah State. And then Tyler Steen, who is the left tackle for Alabama, is the transfer for Vanderbilt and was making his first career start for Alabama. Now, I am typically not a huge Pro Football Focus fan of their grading on any of the teams, quite frankly. Like, I think they do a great job with the NFL. I don't think they always do a great job in college football, but I had nowhere else to go with regards to finding offensive line grades. Couldn't find my Alex Dunlap on the Alabama side of things. So I went to Pro Football Focus to look at their offensive line grades for Alabama, primarily because the Alabama side on the Rivals Network was doing the exact same thing. So I'm kind of stealing their content. Tackle play for Alabama on Saturday wasn't real good. Really. Tyler Steen at left tackle had the better game over the true freshman, J.C. Latham, but neither guy played at a level against Utah State that was, I think, the kind of thing that Texas would be worried about. So Texas is in a position where Alabama throughout the offseason has been slightly concerned about that offensive line. It's just a true story. It's one of the reasons why they brought Tyler Steen in from Vanderbilt, was because they felt like they needed an upgrade on the offensive line, specifically at left tackle. Ironic, because Texas fans still haven't gotten over the Tommy Brockermeyer situation, along with his twin brother, James, who both signed with Alabama in the class of 2021. Neither Brockermeyer brother for Alabama can get on the field. Texas fans, probably because of the hype that I gave Tommy during the recruiting process, would have believed Tommy would have been an instant starter, injuries aside, by the time this game rolled around, had he signed with Texas. Now everybody's in goo-goo for Kelvin Banks, and now Texas fans today maybe wouldn't quite feel so certain about it. But Alabama, for all of its superior recruiting, is in a situation where I think Texas has a chance to do some – look, I guess it comes down to you got Latham as a second-year player, and you've got Texas and his primary opponent, because I do believe that Barron Sorrell is going to play the majority of the game. It's fascinating. Both those kids are from the 2021 class. One, the number 3 player in the country, the other, a high 3-star. And yet, coming into this game, I wonder if the high 3-star doesn't have an advantage over the 5-star. And it's a hell of a thing, I know, for me to show up and do this show and tell you guys, keep your eye on the 3-star, 5-star matchup, because I think the 3-star matchup for Texas potentially has a chance to make some hay in this game. The other thing is, boy, you look at Tyler Steen on the left side. He was just a pretty good player for Vanderbilt. I mean, he wasn't like when he made the transfer over to Alabama, it wasn't like they picked up a first-team all-SEC type of player. He's been pretty good in the SEC. His entrance into the portal had a lot more to do with the fact that quality offensive line starters at, let's say, the major program level, those guys had not been putting themselves in the portal last season. Now, maybe they should have. Maybe it would have sorry, distracted by Batman Forever, a.k.a. 817, saying Luby sounds good. For real. He says he's on his way now in the chat. They go for Tyler Steen because he was available. It says a lot that the guy that was at Vanderbilt, that's a pretty good player, but not a great player, that he upgraded their line and was such an insta-starter for that Alabama offensive line. I think it does paint a picture of maybe just how much of a liability that line might become against the best of the best defensive line fronts that A&M faces over the course of the season. They will play in the SEC West, and then likely you'd think, right, playing Georgia potentially a couple of times this season. They will play games where the opposing team's defensive strengths are the defensive line. And I think if Alabama fans and the people that cover Alabama have a concern about this Alabama team, it's about that Alabama offensive line. The question is there anybody for Texas on that defensive line that can take advantage of the fact that if you're ever going to play Alabama and have an advantage against their offensive line, this is probably the year to try to do it. I mean, you're getting Latham in week 2 of his career. In like 2 years from now, he may be a first-round pick in the NFL draft. So it won't always be like that. What up, Thomas Click? So you look at this Texas defensive line and you wonder, if we start with the Alabama tackles, we've already talked about that right tackle matchup between Latham and Barron Sorrell. And that's the one you probably feel best about if you're Texas, because if you're going to win a battle on the defensive side of the ball, you would think do it with Sorrell, who looked like one of your 2 best players on defense a week ago against Louisiana Monroe. If he can't be that guy, how many guys is Texas going to have that in any of their matchups going to be in a position to win? This feels like one that Texas needs to find a way to get some production from. The other one is an absolute wild card. I mentioned Steen. He's most likely going to be going up against that edge player. So Ogie Ogofu, former Orange Bloods athlete, by the way, no longer an Orange Bloods athlete. Formerly, though, shout out to Ovi. He'll be the primary guy in that matchup against Steen. Can Ovi Ogofu, who, look, this is a guy that's played for Notre Dame. He's been in the college football playoff. He's played against big-time players before. He hasn't always made big-time plays. This is his opportunity. Look, I remember talking to Ovi Ogofu last year, and when he signed from Texas from Notre Dame, he did so thinking that he was going to come to Texas for one season and head off to the NFL. He really felt like this was going to be a stepping stone for him to the league. He did not envision him being involved in this game. But he didn't play well enough last year to go to the NFL. So now this is the year for him. He wants to be an NFL player. And this matchup against Tyler Steen, I think, boy, because I don't know that Steen's an NFL player. This is not the Alabama offensive line of old. It really is not. It's the reason why I'm leading with it in the show tonight when we're talking about, look, if we're trying to create a pathway for how Texas pulls an upset on Saturday, winning the battle at the line of scrimmage against the Alabama offensive line, I think, is the best chance that Texas has, because almost every other area that you look at for Alabama, they got All-Americans everywhere. They got legitimate NFL prospects everywhere, but they really don't. At least it relates to the 2022 season. Steen's not a huge NFL prospect. Otherwise, he'd already been gone. He left Vanderbilt to boost his stock. He was just okay in week 1 against Utah State. Same thing on the other side of the ball. Look, J.C. Latham will end up being a big-time prospect when it's all said and done in the NFL. This is week 2 of his career. So kind of like if you're ever going to get some against Kelvin Banks, and oh, by the way, we all anticipate that Will Anderson will be a guy that will be able to come and get some. I mean, he may be the absolute best player in the country, but Kelvin Banks is week 2 of his career. This is the time to get him. Kelvin Banks at one point in his career is going to turn into an NFL first-round level player. And whether it's Will Anderson or whomever, that's not the guy you necessarily are going to want to attack. But now's the time to come and get some. And now, just like if you're ever going to come after Kelvin Banks, now's the time to do so. And look, that's a bad matchup for Texas on paper. Just to interrupt kind of the conversation. On the other side of the coin, I'm telling you, if there's ever a time to get a hold of J.C. Latham, it's now if you're Texas and you need it to be Barron Sorrell who wins that matchup. The flip side of that is the best player in the country is going up against Kelvin Banks at the height of his powers versus Kelvin Banks trying to figure out his powers. So I saw an interesting bet entry for Prize Picks, and we'll be talking about those on Friday. And Quinn Ewers' rushing yards for the game is it's more or less 9.5, and I thought, okay, they expect him to be sacked on Saturday. Duly noted. Just to finish up that thought, and we'll talk about some more of the defensive side of the ball. We'll even do some buy or sells. If you want to get your comments in the super chat, we'll get them straight to the front of the line when we go into some Q&A, when we go into some buy or sell. Real quick, the SEC says Anderson isn't Lawrence Taylor yet. But, I mean, you just invoked Lawrence Taylor's name. So there are levels to this. No, Will Anderson may not be Lawrence Taylor yet, but you needed to summon the name of Lawrence Taylor to prove your point about what Will Anderson is or isn't. Just some perspective. The SEC, thanks for chiming in. Always good to see you there in the chat. Again, Anderson ain't even Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons was first team All-Pro as a rookie. You're right. Will Anderson might not yet be maybe the best defensive player in the NFL. Touche, my man. Oh, Ethan says, what is my score prediction? Now I'm just, we're off and running. We're answering questions. I said my piece about the defensive line. I think you get it. I was going to get into the interior side of that, and maybe we'll get some questions going as well. I don't want to bore you too much with just defensive line versus offensive line matchups. Ethan asks in the chat, what is my score prediction? Ethan, I should have ignored you because I don't have one yet. Like, honestly, otherwise, I just tell you what my score was. I think Alabama's going to win. I think Alabama's going to cover. I would suggest now. Hold on a second, Katie. See, this is where you're wrong. He is better than me. The only time I ever got a real good pass rush off was against Lanier High School in 1991 when I was a sophomore. I made honorable mention all district on the defensive side of the ball for Class 4A McCallum because of one game I played against Lanier when they just had some scrub that couldn't block me. But Coach Honeycutt at McCallum, rest in peace, clearly didn't think enough of me in that position to carry it over into the 1992 or 1993 season. So, yes, I am going to say Will Anderson is even. He is me. Back to my score. I don't know. Like, what would I say out loud? It wouldn't surprise me if Alabama's in the 50s in this game. I just know this. Alabama, though, sometimes is a little bit more methodical and beating the hell out of people than sometimes we see in Big 12 games. When another team in the Big 12 really starts rolling, it's like 35-0 at the end of the first quarter. And you just, how did that happen? So, the ball just never touched the ground. And so there was one incomplete pass or one touchdown after another. But here we are. I think Texas is going to be competitive for a half. Meaning I think it stays within 7 to 10 points for most of the first half. Texas has got good offensive players. So as good as Alabama is, and they're good, I think that Texas with Bijan and Xavier Worthy, those and Jatavion Sanders and Jordan Whittington. I mean, Texas has the offensive skill talent to make Alabama pay on the defensive side of the ball. I don't know how much success Bijan has against Alabama. I think Texas, its most viable matchups are Xavier Worthy and Jordan Whittington against an Alabama cornerback group that's not really settled yet. I think that one of the really interesting things, and it was kind of a big deal in Alabama as well, Sarkisian. Nick Saban was rotating his corners, including Eli Ricks, who is projected to be a first-round NFL draft pick in 2023, this year. He hasn't yet emerged as a starter for Alabama, but he played more snaps than the starter for Alabama at cornerback. For instance, last week, I'm looking at the numbers right here. Let me go back up to it so that I can tell you these DB numbers, thanks to the guys at Alabama, the Alabama website for Rivals, who lifted this from Pro Football Focus, which means I should just thank Pro Football Focus. Eli Ricks didn't start, but he played 38 snaps. Kool-Aid McKinstry did start, and he played 23 snaps. So it says none of those guys really were targeted and beaten much. Eli Ricks was targeted 3 times. He allowed 1 catch. Kool-Aid McKinstry was targeted 3 times. He gave up 1 catch. Kyrie Jackson's another corner who played 35 snaps. He was targeted 1 time, 0 allowed receptions. And then you've got, I guess their other cornerback would have been Terrion Arnold, who was targeted twice and gave up 1. Utah State could not test Alabama in the passing game. So I don't know. It's hard to say that Texas definitively has an advantage, but I like Xavier Worthy against anybody that he goes against. How they're able to get Xavier Worthy the football is a major question mark in this game. Can they get him intermediate to deep? Same thing with Jordan Whittington. What Texas did offensively a week ago that worked so well against Louisiana Monroe probably doesn't work that well against Alabama, if we're being completely honest. I think Texas knows that. If Quinn Ewers can get Xavier Worthy and Jordan Whittington the ball, those receivers breathe, David Dalrymple says. If you can get those dudes the ball, then they're going to make plays. So when I look at the Texas, when trying to make a prediction on this game, I feel like Alabama's going to score a lot of points. And I think over 4 quarters, I think Alabama's in the 40s or the 50s. The question is what is this Texas offense going to be able to do against this Alabama defense, and where are they able to find their advantages, and just how many big plays are they going to be able to produce? And if you're Texas and you're trying to get into the 40s or the 50s, I think you're going to need your defense and special teams to contribute getting you there. So let's say 42 is the number that you need to win the game. Well, if your special teams and your defense contribute to give you 14, then you have to score 28. Can Texas score 28? I think they can. But it's a game where I expect Alabama at some point to turn Quinn Ewers over a couple of times. Yesterday in the video that we did our Monday Overreaction show, one of the people in our chat suggested that if the over and under was 1.5 for Quinn Ewers turnovers, what side of that would I take? Definitely the more. So I'm expecting Quinn Ewers to turn the ball over. That means to win the ball game, Texas is going to have to either turn Alabama over itself during the game, or they've got to be able to get Alabama off the field. I am not sure that I trust this Texas defense yet to get Alabama off the field. I still have some major question marks about the pass rush and some of the elements of this Texas defense. EJ Wright says, everybody hit the like button. Only 18 likes so far. Hell yeah, hit the like button. I have a fantasy draft in an hour. Do you see me working on my fantasy football cheat sheet? Although, to be fair, I'm going to use the roster watch cheat sheet for the draft. So while I have some mental notes, I don't know how much preparation one needs. The only problem with using the roster watch cheat sheet is that the 3 guys that create the roster watch cheat sheet are in my fantasy league. So I'm using their data and they're the professionals, but I don't really get a huge edge when 25% of the league is made up of guys that make up the fantasy football rankings for roster watch. It's a bit frustrating. I haven't won the league in a while. It's been too damn long. I'm like Texas football in my fantasy league. Seriously, I should rename my team the Texas Longhorn football team, because in fantasy football, I think I've maybe even have been a little bit better than Texas football. I've lost like 4 finals in the last 6 years, but it sucks. Let's see what we've got going on in the chat. Jason says Bama has a mental advantage against SEC teams because they bow down to them. Texas will at least give them a fight. I hope so. Hope so. It's hard not to think of last year's Arkansas game in week 2. And Sarkisian, when asked about that this week, has said he thinks that this team is a lot better than last year's team, but he doesn't know. He does not know. He thought he knew last year going into Arkansas that he had a Big 12 championship level team, and they went 5-7. So Jason says, look, Texas will at least put up a fight. I hope so. I think we all hope and anticipate so, but I don't even know that we can take that completely for granted because this Texas football team hasn't earned the benefit of the doubt. This kind of game is how you earn that benefit of the doubt. David says in the chat, shout out to David, by the way, one of our better posters in the chat here on the Orange Bloods Texas football channel. And yes, like the channel, subscribe to the channel, get notifications on the channel, tell your mama and your daddy about the channel. You can tell your kids. I mean, they may not care, but whatever. That's how you get them to eventually want to go to the University of Texas. You have them watch the Orange Bloods Texas football channel during the week, like through osmosis. They become Texas fans. That's how it works. David says the UT corners have to play tight coverage against the Alabama receivers. I think quick passes are the strength of the Alabama quarterback. I think UT's corners have the ability to win against Alabama receivers. Maybe. Let's start with the first part of this. The UT corners have to play tight coverage against Alabama receivers. I mean, Texas was playing off last week against Louisiana Monroe's receivers. I don't know that I disagree with you, Daniel, with this point, but I don't know that it matters whether I agree or not. I don't know how tight Texas is going to play the Alabama receivers. I also think that, we're at a point now when we look at their starting quarterback, he's a little bit better than the strength of his game is quick passes. I mean, it is. I mean, it was the strength of Colt McCoy. It was at times the strength of a guy like Kyler Murray. So it's not necessarily an insult to say that those types of plays are a strength, but I tend to think we'll see Texas play a little soft, and we'll see how that works. It would really be a change of pace. I mean, think about the touchdown that Deshaun Jameson had last week against Louisiana Monroe. He was 5 or 6 yards off of that Louisiana Monroe receiver at the point of the ball arriving. If that ball's on target, that receiver's catching it in stride, and he's getting a first down. That's against Louisiana Monroe. I don't know. We'll see. It would be different than what we have not seen Texas use their corners in a way where they're walking up to the opponent's wide receivers with that much moxie and saying, we got you no matter where you go. It'd be a massive test. I don't know that Texas trusts its corners yet, but we'll see. Money out to Anus. Good to see you in the chat. The best way to beat Bama is to control the clock and limit possessions. Probably not untrue. Don't know if that's been stated yet or not. It hasn't. We have the running game to do it. Again, maybe. It's a game against Alabama when starting 2 true freshmen along the offensive line could become a problem. May not be. I mean, Texas A&M played 2 true freshmen in its offensive line a year ago in this game. Didn't stop them from winning the game. I don't know that that's apples to apples necessarily, but it's apples to grapes or tangerines. So I think that, the issue about this Texas team in general is that we just don't know that much about it yet. We really don't know about this offensive line. We really don't know about these cornerbacks or the quarterback for Texas. I think what we know is that Bijan is an absolute super baller. Same with Xavier Worthy. And Jatavion Sanders might not be that far away. So Texas has players that are future NFL guys, super college prospects and players, guys that can hurt Alabama. But when we specifically talk about all of these players being able to do exactly that, it means the offensive line's got to help. And this is a test that is unlike anything this offensive line has ever gone up against. That includes all of last season. Every single offensive lineman for this Texas team will go into this game knowing I've never played anybody remotely as good as the guys I'm about to play against. They have to step their level of play up significantly. Alabama's linebackers, better than anything this group of offensive linemen will have ever seen before. Although, maybe if you played against Oklahoma State last year and Malcolm Rodriguez, I don't know that guy ever got enough respect, but watching him on Hard Knocks has me thinking he's already a rookie starter with the Lions. I just think we underrated that dude at linebacker, but Alabama's loaded. And what the Texas offensive line and its quarterback have to do is elevate their games so that Bijan Robinson and Xavier Worthy and Jatavion Sanders have a chance to work their magic. DJ says in the chat, bro, we're better than A&M. They're not even good. Bro, no, Texas isn't. No, bro, they're not. Texas went 5-7 a year ago. And it's a new season. So I wouldn't argue that there's a conversation that can't be had about the 2022 Texas Longhorns against the 2022 Texas A&M Aggies. But the 2022 Longhorns went 5-7 a year ago, and most of those players are back. Texas hasn't earned the right yet to say they're better than most of the teams in the country. Now, it starts this week. Ball out against Alabama, and you can start to say things like Texas is better than Texas A&M. But at this point, they're not. They have not yet proven that. Now, yes, this is the same Alabama team that lost to A&M, that had a backup quarterback. Wow, this is an easy W, 33-20. I legitimately want, as long as it's not heroin or cocaine, I want what DJ's got. DJ, what are you smoking? Don't smoke heroin. Don't smoke crack. But you just predicted a 2-touchdown victory over Alabama in a game where you've got the Texas defense stopping them with 20 points. The SEC in the Super Chat says, if we had a 28-7 lead against, like we did against OU and then collapse and lose, how do we truly feel? Moral victory or upset because we need to get that championship mentality again? We can win. That's an interesting question. How would you feel? Well, look, being up 28-7 and losing, let's say 55-28. So let's say you go up by 3 touchdowns and then Alabama scores 45 straight on you. That's still better than just losing by most scores. I mean, look, if at any point in this game Texas is up 28-7, the electricity in the stadium will be of such magnitude that if you could bottle it up, you could power the city of Austin for like the next few years. If you could pull something like that off. This game, though, comes down to a couple of simple things. Can Texas get Oklahoma off the field? And can Quinn Ewers step up and really – and who was it earlier in the chat? I think it might have been Money Out to Anus that said that running the football and controlling the clock will be two of the things that would make a huge difference in this game. I don't disagree. Really, there's a lot to be said for that. But I also think that we're talking about a situation where Alabama, when they do have the football, is going to be hard to keep out of the end zone. And if they're scoring sevens and it's 17 and it's 14 and then it's 21 and it's 24 and then it's 31, Texas has to be able to keep up, and they are going to need Quinn Ewers to make legitimate big boy baller throws. When we look back to what happened in that A&M game a year ago, a few things. We cannot underestimate that that Texas A&M's talent level at this point is higher than Texas's talent level, especially with regards to the big bodies. And they've been collecting 5-star defensive linemen over the course of the last few years. Same thing with the offensive line. They were just better last year than Texas has proven to be, even with their backup quarterback. But that backup quarterback also played – it required that team to play over its head, Alabama to play below their normal levels, and then it required their quarterback to play better than we really were able to see him at all. And Bryce Young didn't play a Bryce Young game. I mean, if a bunch of things come together, yeah, Texas can absolutely win this game. Michael in the chat, Michael, my business, says the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team did the unthinkable with amateurs against professional Soviet players. Miracles do happen. Of course they do, but that's why they're called miracles. I don't even think it's a miracle for Texas to beat Alabama on Saturday, but a lot of things have to come together. Alabama has to play a bad game. I mean, forget about what Texas does for a second. If Alabama plays a B game, they're going to win this game. They're better than Texas. Texas fans can't get upset about that. You just can't be upset about this notion that Alabama is legitimately better than them. But on any given day, right? So what's the recipe for it to happen? Well, if we look at what happened in the A&M game last year, A&M playing a bad game, Texas playing above what we've seen their levels to have ever been, including at the quarterback position, has to occur. You're going to need your special teams to create some points. You have to turn Alabama over on their offensive side of the ball, and then Quinn Ewers has got to do things that we haven't seen Quinn Ewers do yet. Can it happen? Shit, yeah, it can happen. Is it likely to happen? No. It's why I've just said all week long to Texas fans, go into that game pumped up, go in excited, go in thinking like Jimmy Johnson did against Washington back in 1991 when the Cowboys beat Washington, when Washington had been 11-0 after the game. Jimmy Johnson's talking to the team and he's saying, hey, whenever you go to fight a big old gorilla, you don't ever hit the gorilla lightly. You hit the gorilla with everything you've got. I think Steve Sarkisian views Alabama as the gorilla, and consequently, I think and expect that we're going to see Texas run some trick plays. Texas do some things that we haven't seen before. Be prepared for that. Stan says in the chat, don't think we win, but do think we cover the 20-point spread. Hey, I'm down for that, Stan. I'm down for Texas covering. I don't know that I believe that Texas is going to cover, but believe me, I am. There it is. There it is. SEC says it. Need the Rogue Shop to spike Alabama's Gatorade. Need to do that when they wake up, not during the game. Need to put it in like their breakfast. Remember back in 1999 when the Texas A&M hotel that Texas was staying at food poisoned the team? Was it 99 where that happened? And like half the team were crapping their pants. Just like the Aggies in 99. You got to find a way to get into their hotel and put the Rogue Shop products in their breakfast so that by 11, 12 o'clock, Trust me, I'm speaking from experience. Batman Forever, aka 817, says, pick me up a Luby's plate like we just beat Bama. What am I having tonight? Well, if it's me and I'm at Luby's, it's like 75% of the time it's a full piece of the fried fish. Now, if they've got turkey, if they've got a turkey breast that they're cutting, like with the knife, well, then their turkey is legit. I've always been a big fan of the turkey. Otherwise, if you're at Luby's, you get the fried fish, and then it just comes down to the sides that you prefer. I would get mashed potatoes and mac and cheese. Sometimes, though, I like to get the corn. Kind of depends. Didn't think we'd be having Eric said it, wow, fried fish. I did not think that there would be a Luby's conversation on the video, but I also did not anticipate that necessarily that, Luby's would be closing in my neighborhood today. The Mad Tea Sipper says, where'd that go? By the way, thanks to everybody contributing to the super chat as we do the show today. Texas offense was super vanilla on Saturday. They've got some things for Bama, no doubt. Dude, I 1,000% agree with you. I mean, they weren't even doing basic plays like jet sweeps. We know Texas is going to run some of those. We know that Texas likes to get Xavier Worthy and some of their receivers involved in those quick little short passes that aren't, that are really extended run plays more than anything else, but it's a chance to give your receivers the ball and have them have the ball on the move. Those are like staples of those little shuttle passes. Those are staples of the offense. We didn't even see those on Saturday. So they did play about as vanilla of a game as possible, while still trying to take a few shots that they just didn't hit. But I'm with you. We're definitely, oh my God, you're right. It's just Sports 05. I forgot. Where is our guy? I haven't seen him in the chat. For those of you that do not know, one of our chat, like every night, he's usually in the chat, and I just have not seen him today. He is a member of Orange Bloods. All that's on the line is if Texas wins, he has to get the Pole Assassin's monkey tattooed on his back like a tramp stamp. Blake says in the chat to me, we will track him down if he'll be easy to find. We haven't got the specifics like the design made yet. So if it's the Pole Assassin's monkey, is the monkey on the pole? We haven't figured that out yet. The design, I think, comes later, but the Pole Assassin monkey is what he declared he would get put on his lower back if Texas wins this game. Boy, if the sports gods have any sense of humor at all, Texas wins on Saturday just so that guy has to absolutely cash it in. I never did fully name a score. My tentative score right now would be something along the lines of 45-23, something like that. Haven't fully decided what I'm going to do, but answering the super chat question is answering the super chat question. Jonathan said that the info behind Card as starter source get figured out. Practicing games are obviously very different, but going by Saturday, it didn't look close. All right, well, let me see if I can answer this without answering it. Going into that Thursday, you couldn't have got a single person amongst the Orange Blood staff who would have said that they thought that Hudson Card was going to win the quarterback's job. I'll go so far as, I have been quite emphatic in that I didn't think Hudson Card had a chance in hell of winning the job for reasons that I've outlined for videos for the last 9-10 months. So what happened on that Thursday and what sources could it possibly be? all I will tell you, yes, it's figured out. The exact someone on the viewers side of the hill yelled fire in a crowded theater because I think they were worried that he was going to lose the job. And I think it got around. And I think, if there's a reason why even the competing websites of Orange Bloods reported the same thing, it was a very specific source who I think was talking to all of the sites. And I think that guy read the room wrong. And I think everybody, including Orange Bloods, thought that guy would know. Now, what was interesting is that we checked with some other people with connections to quarterbacks, let's say, leave it out there very vague. They corroborated it. It's the damnedest thing. It really is. And when all these guys are gone in a few years, we can get it. We'll still be talking about this story. It's a little bit like the swoop stuff. It's not even close. Like all these years later, I can tell you that it was Charlie Strong who said that, but you couldn't say that in real time. Couldn't say, well, where are you guys hearing that it's Tyrone Swoops and it's not even close? We could not say Charlie Strong told us. But all these years later, I can kind of come out and confess that in 2016, so that was 6 years ago, the day before the Notre Dame game, I'm talking to Charlie Strong on the phone because he wants to apologize to me for telling us that it's not even close and then it didn't happen. And he felt bad about it. He was worried that he might have put Anwar in a position where maybe Anwar would lose his job. And Charlie Strong and I talked for like 45 minutes that day about a number of things. But at the end of the day, it was because he had told Orange Bloods that as an unnamed source. And it's one of the reasons why we were like, okay, well, we've got to report it. On this particular deal, all I can tell you is somebody that you would have thought would have known was giving us inside information that was not favorable to the person that he was most connected to. And then when we spoke with other people, they corroborated it, and it was really weird, but we went with it. And I don't know what else to say about that story other than we thought we were getting the information from people that would know, and yeah, it didn't happen that way. Batman has got his Luann special. Says Agiye Hall will have a big play opportunity in this game as well. Man, I kind of agree. Why else have that guy dress out and go through the pregame routine and do everything as if he was going to play on Saturday night, even though you knew you weren't going to play him, unless there was a moment in the very next game that you wanted to make sure he was as prepared as possible for. I don't know that we see all of the Texas receivers. And I don't know that Agiye Hall plays more than 5 snaps on Saturday. But they, I think, will have something at some point in that game cooked up for him. And I think they'll take their shot, and it will largely come down in that moment. Will Quinn Ewers be able to make the throw if Agiye Hall is able to get into a position that allows for them to make a play downfield in the passing game? Tom G in the super chat says, interesting stuff from Alex in the first game. 0 sacks and 22 pass attempts. Now there were quarterback pressures, but thought that was interesting. In the Alabama first game. Sorry. I thought that said Alex, and it just meant Allah. And I was like, God, there were sacks. What are you talking about? No, you're right, Tom. And I don't know if you're just joining into the chat or not. I talked about this early in the show with this Texas. I think the real matchup where Texas has to win and can win, I think they can win this battle against the Alabama offensive line. It is the area that Alabama is most concerned about. Now, Tom, you mentioned the pass rush side of things, that 0 sacks allowed in 22 pass attempts, but there were some quarterback pressures. When I tell you that the Alabama people are worried about the offensive line, let me read you this section from TideIllustrated.com, which is in the Rivals Network, our Alabama website, and it's talking about the run blocking for Alabama. The article says, quote, with all the criticism surrounding Alabama's ground game right now, it's worth noting that the Crimson Tide currently ranked 4th nationally, averaging 8.69 yards per carry. That's an interesting stat. Alabama ran for 278 and a touchdown during last week's opener. While those stats look pretty on paper, they're a bit deceiving when evaluating the Crimson Tide's run block ability. Here's where it kind of gets interesting. Although that number is certainly interesting, 8.69 yards per carry. Take out the 100 yards and a touchdown from Bryce Young from him scrambling on pass plays. And what you're left with is Alabama gained 178 yards on 27 attempts. Now, that's still 6.59 yards per carry. Pretty damn good. However, as this article points out, now we're starting to get into an area where if ifs and uts were, that whole thing about your uncle. If you take out the 58-yard run from Jahmyr Gibbs and the 23-yard run from Jamarian Miller, so he's taking out the two biggest runs from their 27 attempts. The other 25 attempts, I'm sorry, I'm sure you were told there would be no math. The bottom line is, out of the other 25 running snaps that didn't include their two biggest run plays and the quarterback scrambling, they only averaged 3.88 yards per attempt. That was this Alabama writer's way of letting people know it's not perfect there. And that offensive line for Alabama is kind of in the same position that it was in that everything is for Texas. Is there's just so much that they won't know about that group until they play somebody real. And this week, Texas is for real. Texas's defensive line, that is the strength of their defense. Now, it might not be at the edge position, but it probably is with the two defensive tackles in that jack position with Barron Sorrell. So something to keep an eye on. But Alabama, as they go into this week and they're talking about how they run the football, they realize that the majority of the time when they ran the football on Saturday against Utah State, they were not running up and down the field. So while they come in with the nation's 4th best yards per carry after week 1 in the ground game, that number is deceiving because most of the ground game from Saturday against Utah State, again, we're talking about what would amount to 25 carries, less than 4 yards per carry. So something to keep an eye on. If Utah State can have success limiting Alabama in the ground game, Texas has to be able to do so as well. If we exit Saturday, it'll be really disappointing on Saturday if we get to a spot where we think the Texas, yes, I know, Blake, weird. I'm about to sign off here in a little bit too, but all of a sudden having some connection issues, not a good thing for the show tonight. If we get to Saturday and it feels like Texas did a worse job than Utah State did running the football, I think that'd be really disappointing, all things being equal. Let's see, a couple of other comments, questions I'm looking for. There's some parking conversation taking place in the chat as well. All right, guys, get your buy or sell questions in while you can. Get your last few questions in before we sign out. I do want to remind everybody, like the video, subscribe to the channel. We've got Drunk Uncle tomorrow night, the modcast coming up later in the week. If you're new to the channel, we're doing stuff on the daily regularly, and certainly on Texas Alabama week, you're going to see us doing the same. Danny says, buy or sell, Casey Kane will have a better season than Agiye Hall. I'll buy that. At this point, Casey Kane is more consistent in practice. He's emerged as a starter, but that's a little bit of a soft buy in the sense that I think Casey Kane's numbers, he's really the fourth or fifth option in the passing game right now when you consider Whittington, Worthy, Sanders, Bijan, Gunnar Helm. Casey Kane on any given play might be option number 5 or number 6. Agiye Hall might be option 8 right now. So I don't know that it's a massive difference, but I do think his usage rate will be higher, and he'll have a slightly better season than Agiye Hall, who might have more yards per carry and more touchdowns, but fewer total receiving yards and receptions. Tom G says, buy or sell. Brent Thompson goes deep twice or more this week. Sell. I really think that this is going to be a player where a game where the Longhorns are going out of their way to put the adults on the field, and I don't know that Brennan Thompson's ready for this game just yet. So I like where your head is. I think they'd rather use those 2 opportunities for other players at this point, though. I mean, Xavier Worthy, yes. Brennan Thompson, I'm not sure that I'm there yet. Justin Rosenthal says, Will Anderson plus 1.5 sacks. You know what? I did not know this about Will Anderson. But it turns out that Will Anderson throughout his career has been a bit of a slow starter as it relates to sacks. And each of the last couple of years, I think in his first 3 games, he's been either sackless or he's only had 1. I'm going to give Will Anderson 1 sack on Saturday. And I'm going to say that Kelvin Banks does a good enough job to slow Will Anderson down from having a flat-out sack party. But I do think Alabama as a team might get 5. Buy or sell, 5 snaps out of the Wildcat on Saturday. I'm going to sell. I would like to see it, but I think Steve Sark – I don't know that the Wildcat is one of the things that Sarkisian likes to do in his offense a ton. I just don't think that that's a staple of his offense. So while it is something that can throw the other team off, can give you a changeup of sorts, especially when you've got a running back that has some quarterback experience as a high school player, but he hasn't gone to it. And I'm going to sell. I just am not expecting much from the Wildcat on Saturday. Would love to see it, though, being completely transparent. I'd love to see it. I just don't think that that's the thing that we're going to see. Tom says, buy or sell. Cam Williams replaces Jones on the line before the end of the game. I'm going to say sell. Well, before the end of the game, buy. Because by the end of the game, I'm expecting it to be a big enough blowout that the backups can get in and get some reps. But I'm not expecting Cameron Williams in this game to replace Christian Jones at any point as the starting right tackle. All right, let's see. Time for one last buy or sell question before I start getting ready for my fantasy football draft, which starts at 7:30. Buy or sell, Jatavian leads the team in receptions on Saturday. Sell. I'm going with Xavier Worthy. But I think Jatavian may be in a position to be right there next to him, and I think he's got a chance to get some favorable matchups that wouldn't otherwise exist. Tom G jumps into the super chat before we finish and says, Bijan Robinson with 25-plus carries and X with 10-plus targets. Sell. I don't think either will get that high. I'm going to put Bijan at about 15 carries. I'm going to put Xavier at about 8 or 9 targets, not quite up. Boy, I'd love to see it. Honestly, I'd love to see it. But I don't know if both of those two things can happen at the same time in this game. If they can, it probably means Texas is in a position to pull the upset. I think both go under, but I think both could occur. But in order for both to occur, it's hard for me to imagine Bijan with 25 plus carries. That would mean Texas is having a lot of success running the football and controlling the game. And I'm just not quite sure that I believe that yet. Connor J sneaks in one last buy or sell question. Quinn Ewers will convince the national audience that he has an elite arm talent after Saturday. Buy. What the hell? Kind of 50-50 on it. I don't know that this is Quinn Ewers' ball game, but can there be enough flashes that the national audience is convinced that he has an elite arm? Sure. I think there's some confirmation bias that already exists. He's a former number 1 overall player nationally. So people will come in, and if they see it, they'll be willing to believe it because I think it's already planted into their heads that this is going to be a guy that in time is an incredible football player. That's it, guys. I'm going to go get ready for my fantasy football league draft for myself and Blake, the producer. We want to remind you, like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's that easy. We ask you all the time to do it. It really does help us a ton if you guys can help our algorithm analytics by doing a little thing of both subscribing and liking the video. And of course, notifications matter too. But we really like the likes and the subscribes more. Other than flat out cash, love the video to be liked and subscribed to. Thanks to Blake for producing. Thanks to all of you for joining in. Drunk Uncle tomorrow night, guys. He's got a special guest, somebody that knows Nick Saban really, really, really well. I think he even wrote a book about the inside the brain of Nick Saban. That'll be tomorrow night. You'll absolutely want to tune in here to the Orange Bloods Texas Football Channel. But until then, that's it for me. That's it for now. You guys be good to each other. Wish me luck. Later.